The morning mist clung to the towering Douglas firs like ghostly fingers as 23-year-old Marcus Chen adjusted his backpack straps one final time. Beside him, his younger brother Danny, 19 and eager for adventure, bounced on his toes with nervous energy. The Cascade Trail stretched before them into the emerald depths of Washington's Olympic Peninsula, a ribbon of packed earth that had witnessed countless hikers seeking solace in the wilderness. "You sure about this route, Marcus?" Danny asked, studying the weathered trail map they'd picked up at the Port Angeles ranger station. "Looks pretty isolated out there." Marcus smiled, the same reassuring expression that had comforted his little brother through countless childhood fears. "That's exactly why we're doing it, little brother. No crowds, no noise, just us and the mountains. Mum and Dad would have loved this." The mention of their parents, lost in a car accident just 8 months earlier, cast a brief shadow over Danny's features. The life insurance settlement had given them financial freedom, but nothing could fill the hollow ache of loss. This hiking trip through the Olympic Mountains was Marcus's idea, a way to honor their father's memory while finding some measure of peace in the wilderness he'd always loved. Before we continue with this incredible story, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything to us. Now, let's return to that fateful morning in September 1990. The brothers set off just after sunrise, their boots crunching softly on the frost-covered trail. Marcus, ever the responsible older sibling, had planned their 3-day route meticulously. They would follow the Cascade Trail deep into the heart of the Olympic wilderness, camp at designated sites, and emerge refreshed and reconnected. What neither brother could have imagined was that they were walking toward a mystery that would haunt their hometown of Tacoma for over a decade. The first day passed without incident. They made good time through the lower elevations, stopping frequently for Danny to photograph the stunning vistas with his new 35mm camera, a graduation gift from their aunt. The weather held clear and crisp, typical for early September in the Cascades. They pitched their tent at Miller Creek Campground as planned, sharing stories around their small camp stove and watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Remember when Dad used to take us camping at Mount Rainier?" Danny said, his voice soft in the darkness. "He always said the mountains were where you could hear yourself think." Marcus nodded, staring up at the Milky Way stretched across the unpolluted sky. He was right. I feel closer to him out here than I have since the accident. Neither brother noticed the figure watching them from the tree line, or the soft click of a camera shutter capturing their intimate moment by the dying firelight. The second day brought subtle changes that should have served as warnings. The trail grew narrower and less maintained as they climbed toward the high country. Markers became sporadic, and the cheerful chatter of other hikers they'd encountered the previous day faded to an oppressive silence. The forest itself seemed different here, older, darker, filled with shadows that shifted when they weren't looking directly at them. Around midday, they encountered their first sign of trouble. The bridge across Salmon Creek, clearly marked on their map, had been washed out by spring floods. The creek ran swift and deep, fed by snowmelt from the peaks above. While not impassable, crossing would require careful navigation and could add hours to their planned route. "We could turn back," Danny suggested, eyeing the rushing water with concern. "Hit one of the alternate trails." But Marcus, driven by a determination that bordered on stubbornness, shook his head. "We didn't come this far to quit now. Dad would have found a way across." They spent an hour scouting upstream before finding a series of fallen logs that formed a precarious bridge. Marcus crossed first, testing each step before calling for Danny to follow. His younger brother made it 3/4 of the way across before his foot slipped on the moss-covered bark. The fall wasn't fatal. Danny dropped only 6 feet into the shallow pool below, but his camera bag struck a rock during the tumble. When he fished the expensive equipment from the creek, water poured from every seam. The camera that had documented their journey so far was ruined, its film likely destroyed. "I'm sorry, Marcus," Danny said, his voice thick with disappointment. "I know how much those pictures meant to you." Marcus helped his shivering brother to shore, more concerned with Danny's well-being than any lost photographs. They made camp early that afternoon, building a larger fire than usual to dry Danny's soaked clothes and boots. The delay put them behind schedule, but Marcus assured his brother they could make up the time the following day. As evening approached, they heard voices echoing through the forest. Other hikers, it seemed, though the sounds came from an unexpected direction. The voices were too distant to make out words, but their tones suggested urgency, perhaps even distress. Marcus and Danny called out in response, their shouts swallowed by the dense canopy above. "Should we go look for them?" Danny asked, still wrapped in his sleeping bag by the fire. Marcus considered this, studying their map by flashlight. According to their route, there shouldn't be any other trails within miles of their current position. The voices could belong to lost hikers, or perhaps hunters who'd strayed from their designated areas. Either way, leaving their established campsite to search for strangers in unfamiliar terrain after dark struck him as dangerously foolish. "We'll listen for them in the morning," he decided. "If they're really in trouble, they'll signal for help again at first light." But morning brought only silence. The brothers broke camp early, both eager to reach their final destination and begin the hike back to civilization. The trail ahead climbed steadily through old-growth forest, past massive cedars that had stood for centuries before European settlers ever set foot in Washington. The beauty of their surroundings should have been breathtaking, but something felt fundamentally wrong. Danny was the first to voice what they both felt. "This doesn't look right, Marcus. The trail's supposed to swing east here, but we've been heading north for the last hour." Marcus pulled out their compass and map, his face growing pale as he realized his brother was correct. Somewhere during their morning hike, they'd left the official Cascade trail and followed what appeared to be an unmarked path deeper into the wilderness. The terrain around them didn't match their topographical map, and their compass readings suggested they were miles off course. "How is this possible?" Danny asked, panic creeping into his voice. "We were following the trail markers." Marcus backtracked 50 yards and discovered something that made his blood run cold. What they'd assumed were official trailblazes, small cuts in tree bark marking the correct route, were actually much fresher than they should have been. Someone had deliberately created false markers, leading them away from the established trail and into uncharted territory. The realization that they'd been deliberately misled transformed their hiking adventure into something far more sinister. Marcus tried to maintain calm as he explained their situation to Danny, but his younger brother's face went white with fear. "Someone's been following us," Danny whispered. "Someone wanted us to get lost." Marcus couldn't deny the possibility. The false trail markers, the voices they'd heard the previous night, the feeling of being watched, it all pointed to a terrifying conclusion. They weren't alone in the wilderness, and whoever was out there meant them harm. They spent the remainder of that day attempting to retrace their steps, but the false trail seemed to multiply and branch in impossible directions. Every path they tried led deeper into the forest, and their compass readings became increasingly erratic. By evening, they were thoroughly lost, with no idea which direction might lead them back to safety. As darkness fell, they made a desperate decision. They would abandon their planned route entirely and hike due south, using the North Star for navigation. It was a risky strategy that could lead them even further astray, but staying put seemed like a death sentence. Someone had deliberately led them into this maze of false trails, and that someone might still be watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They hiked through the night, stumbling over roots and rocks in the dim starlight. Danny's ruined boots had begun to fall apart, and every step became an ordeal of pain and determination. Marcus supported his younger brother as they pressed onward, driven by the terrible certainty that stopping meant death. Dawn found them at the edge of a steep ravine, exhausted and disoriented. Below them, a narrow stream wound between rocky walls, not marked on any map they'd seen. Danny collapsed against a boulder, his feet bloody and swollen, his face grey with exhaustion. "I can't go any further," he gasped. "Marcus, I think we're going to die out here." It was then that they heard the sound that would haunt the surviving brother for the rest of his life, the soft click of a camera shutter echoing from somewhere in the forest behind them. They weren't alone. They'd never been alone. And whoever had been stalking them through the wilderness was finally ready to reveal himself. Marcus grabbed his brother's arm, pulling him to his feet with desperate strength. "We have to move, Danny, now!" But as they stumbled toward the ravine's edge, seeking any possible escape route, a figure emerged from the tree line. He was a man in his 50s, wearing camouflage clothing and carrying professional photography equipment. His eyes held the cold, calculating look of a predator who'd finally cornered his prey. "Going somewhere, boys?" the man asked, his voice calm and conversational. "I've been getting some wonderful shots of your little adventure. Especially that touching conversation about your parents the first night. Very emotional stuff." The camera hanging around his neck was expensive and professional, the type used by serious photographers or journalists. But there was nothing journalistic about the man's demeanor. He radiated menace, and the hunting knife on his belt caught the morning sunlight with a wicked gleam. Marcus stepped protectively in front of his brother, his mind racing through possible escape scenarios. The ravine behind them offered the only route away from their stalker, but the drop looked treacherous, possibly fatal. Still, it might be their only chance. "What do you want?" Marcus asked, stalling for time. The man smiled, lifting his camera to take another photograph. "I want to document the human experience in its purest form. Fear, desperation, the bonds between brothers faced with impossible choices. You two have been perfect subjects." Danny whimpered behind him, and Marcus felt his protective instincts surge. Whatever this madman had planned, he wouldn't let him harm his little brother. Not Danny, not the only family he had left in the world. "Run," Marcus whispered, never taking his eyes off their stalker. "When I give the signal, run for the ravine and don't look back." But the man had heard him. "Oh, I don't think so," he said, pulling the knife from his belt. "We're just getting to the dramatic climax. This is where the real artistry happens." The next few moments unfolded like a nightmare. Marcus lunged at their attacker, hoping to buy Danny time to escape. The older man was stronger and more experienced with the knife, but Marcus fought with the desperate fury of someone protecting his family. They grappled at the ravine's edge, the blade flashing between them as they struggled for control. Danny, instead of running as instructed, grabbed a fallen branch and struck their attacker across the back. The blow wasn't enough to disable the man, but it created the opening Marcus needed. He drove his shoulder into the stalker's midsection, sending both of them tumbling toward the rocky edge. The ravine swallowed all three of them in a cascade of loose stone and desperate screams. Marcus's last clear memory was the sensation of falling, the sharp crack of impact against stone, and his brother's voice calling his name from somewhere in the darkness above. When he regained consciousness, Marcus found himself wedged between two boulders at the bottom of the ravine. His left leg was clearly broken, bent at an unnatural angle that sent waves of agony through his body with every breath. But he was alive, and more importantly, he could hear Danny calling for him from somewhere upstream. "Marcus! Marcus, can you hear me?" His brother's voice sounded weak and frightened, but alert. Marcus tried to respond, but his throat felt like sandpaper and only a hoarse croak emerged. He managed to work himself free of the rocks that had saved his life, dragging his useless leg behind him as he crawled toward the sound of Danny's voice. He found his younger brother trapped beneath a fallen tree trunk, conscious but unable to move. Danny's face was pale with blood loss from a gash across his forehead, but his eyes were clear and focused. "Thank God," Danny breathed when he saw Marcus approaching. "I thought you were dead. That psycho fell with you. I think he hit those rocks over there." Marcus followed his brother's gaze and saw their stalker's motionless form sprawled across the stream bed 50 yards away. The man wasn't moving, and the unnatural position of his neck suggested he wouldn't be bothering anyone ever again. His expensive camera lay shattered beside him, its film exposed and ruined by the impact. "Can you get this tree off me?" Danny asked. "I think my ribs are broken, but I might be able to walk if you help me." Marcus assessed the situation with growing despair. The fallen trunk was massive, far too heavy for one injured person to move. Even if he'd been healthy and strong, shifting that much weight would require tools and leverage they simply didn't possess. And his own broken leg made him virtually useless for any kind of rescue operation. "I'll find another way," he promised, though they both knew he was lying. "Maybe I can dig under it, or find some rocks to use as a fulcrum." They spent the next several hours in futile attempts to free Danny from his wooden prison. Marcus exhausted himself trying different approaches, but the tree remained immovable. As afternoon faded toward evening, both brothers were forced to confront the horrible truth. Danny was trapped, possibly permanently. "You have to leave me," Danny said quietly, his voice steady despite the pain. "Follow the stream downstream. It has to lead somewhere, maybe to a road or another trail. Get help and come back for me." Marcus shook his head violently. "I'm not leaving you here. We stay together, no matter what." But Danny had inherited the same stubborn determination as his older brother. "Listen to me, Marcus. One of us has to survive to tell people what happened here. That maniac might have killed other hikers. There could be families out there who never learned what happened to their loved ones. You have to get out and tell the authorities." The logic was unassailable, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to abandon his little brother in that desolate ravine. Danny was the only family he had left, the last connection to their parents and their shared childhood. Leaving him meant accepting that he might never see him alive again. "I'll make a shelter," Marcus said desperately. "Hunt for food, find a way to signal for help. We can survive here until someone finds us." Danny smiled sadly, the same expression he'd worn as a child when trying to comfort Marcus after a nightmare. "You know that's not realistic. Winter's coming, and you can barely walk. If you stay here, we'll both die, and no one will ever know what happened to us." The argument continued through the night, but both brothers knew Danny was right. Marcus's broken leg was becoming infected, and their meager supplies wouldn't sustain them for more than a few days. Their only hope lay in one brother escaping to summon rescue, and Danny's trapped condition made the choice obvious. As dawn broke over the ravine, Marcus finally accepted the inevitable. He gathered their remaining food and water, fashioned a crude crutch from a fallen branch, and prepared for the most difficult journey of his life. Danny pressed something into his hand, a small, disposable camera he'd kept in his jacket pocket as a backup. "Take pictures of the way out," Danny instructed. "Make sure the rescue team can find me again." Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He embraced his brother one final time, memorizing the feel of Danny's arms around him, the familiar scent of his hair, the steady beat of his heart. "I'll come back," Marcus promised. "No matter how long it takes, I'll come back for you." Danny smiled through his tears. "I know you will. Now go, before I change my mind and make you stay." Marcus limped away downstream, using his makeshift crutch to navigate the rocky terrain. every step took him further from his brother, further from the most important person in his world. He stopped frequently to take photographs with Danny's backup camera, documenting landmarks and distinctive features that might help a rescue team locate the trapped hiker. The stream led him through increasingly wild terrain, far from any established trail or human presence. His infected leg slowed his progress to a painful crawl, and fever began to cloud his judgment. He lost track of time, stumbling forward through a haze of pain and determination, driven solely by the promise he'd made to his brother. After what might have been days or weeks, his fevered mind couldn't accurately gauge the passage of time. Marcus finally stumbled onto a logging road. A passing truck driver found him collapsed beside the gravel path, delirious with infection and exhaustion. The photographs in his pocket had been damaged by water and rough handling, but several images remained clear enough to show the rocky terrain where Danny waited. Marcus spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering from his injuries and the severe infection that had nearly killed him. As soon as he was strong enough to speak coherently, he told authorities about Danny's location and the man who had stalked them through the wilderness. But when rescue teams reached the ravine, using Marcus's photographs as guides, they found something that defied all explanation. The fallen tree was there, exactly as Marcus had described. The dead stalker lay where he'd fallen, his body partially decomposed, but still recognizable. His shattered camera and scattered equipment provided evidence of his predatory behavior, but Danny was nowhere to be found. There was no sign of struggle, no blood trail, no indication of how a severely injured person trapped beneath a massive tree trunk could have escaped. The tree itself showed no evidence of being moved or disturbed. It was as if Danny had simply vanished from an impossible situation, leaving behind only questions and a brother consumed by guilt and confusion. Marcus spent the next 15 years searching for answers. He returned to the ravine countless times, exploring every possible escape route, hiring private investigators, and consulting with survival experts. He never found so much as a trace of his missing brother, and the official investigation eventually concluded that Danny Chen had died in the wilderness, his body claimed by scavengers or natural decomposition. But Marcus never stopped believing that Danny had somehow survived. Late at night, lying awake in his apartment in Tacoma, he would stare at the ceiling and imagine scenarios where his brother had escaped the ravine and built a new life somewhere far away. Maybe Danny had suffered memory loss from his injuries. Maybe he'd chosen to disappear rather than return to a world filled with painful memories. Maybe he was living under a new identity, happy and safe, just beyond Marcus's reach. The disposable camera from that final morning remained undeveloped in Marcus's closet, too precious and too terrifying to process. Those images represented the last tangible connection to his brother, the final moments they'd shared together. As long as the film remained unexposed, Marcus could pretend it might contain answers to the questions that haunted his dreams. In 2005, 15 years after that terrible hiking trip, Marcus finally found the courage to have the film developed. He drove to a specialty photography shop in Seattle, explaining to the technician that the images were old and potentially damaged. The woman behind the counter assured him that modern processing techniques could recover pictures from even severely compromised film. Marcus waited in the parking lot for an hour, his hands shaking with nervous anticipation. When the technician called to say his photographs were ready, he almost drove away without collecting them. Only the promise he'd made to Danny to never stop searching, never give up hope, gave him the strength to walk back inside. Most of the images were exactly what he'd expected. Blurry shots of the ravine, landmarks he'd documented during his escape, evidence of the terrain rescue teams would need to navigate. But the final photograph on the roll showed something that stopped his heart and changed everything he thought he knew about that morning 15 years ago. The last image showed Danny, clearly and unmistakably, standing beside the fallen tree that had supposedly trapped him. But he wasn't pinned beneath the massive trunk. He was standing free and uninjured, looking directly at the camera with an expression Marcus had never seen before. His brother's face showed no sign of fear or pain, only a strange, knowing sadness that seemed to look straight through the photograph and into Marcus's soul. In the background, barely visible in the shadows, stood two additional figures. One was the stalker who had died in the fall, but he appeared whole and uninjured, his predatory smile replaced by an expression of confusion and loss. The other figure was harder to make out, but Marcus recognized the familiar silhouette with a shock that left him gasping for breath. It was their father, exactly as he'd appeared in life, standing with one protective hand on Danny's shoulder. The man who had died in a car accident over a year before their hiking trip was there in the ravine, as real and solid as if he'd never left their world. Marcus stared at the photograph until his vision blurred with tears, trying to understand what he was seeing. The image was impossible, defying every law of physics and logic he understood. But there was no denying the evidence before him. Somehow, in that desolate ravine 15 years ago, the boundaries between life and death had blurred in ways he'd never imagined possible. The photograph revealed the truth that Marcus had been unable to accept. Danny hadn't been trapped beneath that tree. He'd been freed by forces beyond human understanding, called to join their father in whatever realm lay beyond death. The boy who had died alongside his parents in spirit had finally been reunited with them in reality, leaving behind a brother who was meant to carry on alone. Marcus understood now why rescue teams had found no trace of Danny in the ravine. His brother hadn't escaped through any earthly means. He'd simply moved beyond the boundaries of the physical world, crossing over to a place where broken families could be whole again. The stalker, too, had found his own form of justice in death, trapped forever in the scene of his crimes, while his intended victims moved on to something better. The knowledge brought Marcus a peace he hadn't felt since that morning 15 years ago, but it also filled him with a profound sense of loss. Danny was safe, reunited with their parents, free from the pain and fear that had marked their final days together. But he was also gone forever, beyond the reach of any earthly search or rescue. Marcus kept the photograph in his wallet, a secret reminder that death wasn't always an ending, and that love could transcend even the most impossible circumstances. He stopped his desperate searches of the Olympic wilderness, no longer driven by the hope of finding his living brother. Instead, he focused on honoring Danny's memory by helping other families find closure in their own losses. He became a volunteer with mountain rescue organizations, using his intimate knowledge of the Olympic wilderness to help locate missing hikers and bring them home safely. In each successful rescue, he saw a reflection of the brother he couldn't save and found purpose in ensuring other families wouldn't endure the years of uncertainty that had nearly destroyed him. The camera that had revealed the truth about Danny's fate remained in Marcus's possession, a constant reminder that some questions have answers beyond human understanding. Sometimes, late at night, he would take out the photograph and study his brother's peaceful expression, drawing comfort from the knowledge that Danny had found what they'd both been searching for in the wilderness, a way home to the people they'd lost. The official case files listed Danny Chen as presumed dead, another victim of the Pacific Northwest's unforgiving wilderness. But Marcus knew better. His brother hadn't died in that ravine. He'd simply stepped across a boundary that most people never see, moving from one form of existence to another with the quiet dignity that had marked his entire life. The horror that had stalked them through the forest was real, documented in the recovered evidence of their attackers' predatory behavior. But the true mystery of their story wasn't the human evil they'd encountered. It was the divine grace that had intervened to protect the innocent and reunite a family torn apart by tragedy. In the end, the camera had exposed not horror, but hope, proof that love survives beyond death, that families separated by circumstance can find each other again, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin where earthly journeys end. Danny Chen had found his way home at last, and that knowledge allowed his surviving brother to finally find peace in a world that had seemed empty without him.